Every year, the Sahara moves south. The exact rate is debated, but the most cited figure, from a 2018 study published in the Journal of Climate, places it at roughly 10% expansion of the desert's land area since 1920, an advance averaging tens of kilometers per decade along its southern margins. In its path lies a belt of land called the Sahel. The Sahel is a 5,400-kilometer strip running west to east across the African continent, from the Atlantic coast of Mauritania, across Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, the northern reaches of Nigeria, Chad, and into Sudan and Eritrea. It is the transition zone between the Sahara Desert to the north and the savanna grasslands to the south. The Arabic word for shore gave it its name. It is the shore of the desert. Roughly 100 million people live in it. In 1960, the Sahel was a band of grassland, scattered acacia, and seasonal rivers. Average rainfall in northern Mali in 1960 was around 400 millimeters per year. In 2024, the same region averaged less than 250 millimeters. The Sahara's southern boundary, marked by the line of land where annual rainfall drops below 100 millimeters, has shifted south by between 100 and 250 kilometers since 1900, depending on the longitude. The lake that gave its name to Chad, Lake Chad, has lost approximately 90% of its surface area since 1963. This is the story of a region the size of the European Union, home to 100 million people, where the soil itself is moving. The cities the desert has not yet reached are watching it approach. Some of them have already lost. The Sahel sits between roughly 12 and 17 degrees north latitude. It is, in geographic terms, almost exactly the same band of latitude as the Caribbean. Its rains arrive from the south, carried by the West African monsoon, which moves north through the boreal summer and retreats by October. In a wet year, the rains fall hard and the savanna greens. In a dry year, the rains fail. The region has been inhabited continuously for at least 5,000 years. Cave paintings in the Tassili N'Ajjer Plateau of southern Algeria depict cattle herding, hippopotamus hunts, and tropical river fishing, all on land that is now, in 2026, hyper-arid desert. The paintings date from a period geologists call the African Humid Period, which ended around 5,500 years ago. The Sahara that existed before that was not a desert. It was a grassland with rivers, lakes, and an estimated population of pastoralists in the hundreds of thousands. The desert that exists today is, in geological time, recent. The Sahel that exists today is what remains of the savanna belt that was once the heart of the continent. In the medieval period, the Sahel was one of the wealthiest economic zones on the planet. The trans-Saharan trade routes, caravan corridors running from the Mediterranean coast to the Niger River, carried gold north and salt south, financing empires whose territories rivaled those of contemporaneous Europe. The Ghana Empire, the Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire, the Kanem-Bornu Empire, each ruled millions of square kilometers across what is now Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, and Chad. The wealthiest individual in recorded human history may have lived here. Mansa Musa, ruler of the Mali Empire from 1312 to 1337, possessed gold reserves so vast that his 1324 pilgrimage to Mecca, accompanied by an estimated 60,000 attendants and 80 camels, each carrying around 130 kilograms of gold dust, caused the value of gold in Egypt to crash for over a decade. The historian Ibn Khaldun, writing later, estimated the disruption to the Cairo gold market lasted 12 years. The capital of Mansa Musa's empire was Niani, on the upper Niger River. The intellectual capital was Timbuktu. Timbuktu sits at roughly 16 degrees north latitude, on the southern edge of the Sahara, 2 kilometers from the present northern bank of the Niger River. It was founded around the 11th century as a seasonal camp for Tuareg nomads. By the 14th century, under the Mali Empire, it had grown into a city of around 50,000 people. By the 16th century, under the Songhai Empire, it held 3 major mosques, the Sankore, Jingareber, and Sidi Yahya, and a university, the University of Sankore, that by some estimates hosted up to 25,000 students at its peak. The teaching covered theology, mathematics, astronomy, law, and medicine. The wealth was paper as much as gold. Over the course of 5 centuries, the scholars of Timbuktu produced and collected manuscripts in Arabic, Songhai, Fulfulde, Tamashek, and Soninke. The manuscripts addressed Islamic jurisprudence, but also botany, conflict resolution, astronomy, music theory, ethics, and the proper treatment of women in marriage. The collections of Timbuktu were the largest in West Africa. They were, for a period in the 15th and 16th centuries, among the largest libraries in the Islamic world. The number of manuscripts surviving today is not precisely known. Estimates range from 300,000 to 700,000. Some are held in the Ahmed Baba Institute, a state-funded archive established in 1973. Others, possibly the majority, are held privately in family libraries passed down for generations, kept in trunks under beds, sealed in tin boxes, and stored in homes across the city and the surrounding desert. In 2012, this library nearly ended. In January 2012, a Tuareg-led rebellion in northern Mali, supported by Islamist militant groups that had absorbed weapons and fighters from the collapse of Libya the previous year, overran the regional capital of Kidal. By April, the rebels had captured Timbuktu. By July, a hardline Islamist faction, Ansar Dine, had taken effective control of the city. They declared the historical Sufi shrines of Timbuktu to be idolatrous. They began destroying the tombs of saints with picks and bulldozers. Of the city's 16 mausoleums, 14 were damaged or destroyed. The manuscripts were the next target. Beginning in the months before the city fell, a librarian named Abdul Qadir Haidara and a network of associates began in secret to move the manuscripts. They removed them from the Ahmed Baba Institute and from private libraries. They packed them into metal lockers, the kind sold in markets as luggage. They loaded the lockers onto donkey carts, into pirogues on the Niger River, and eventually into 4x4 vehicles. Over the course of approximately 8 months, an estimated 350,000 manuscripts were moved out of Timbuktu, smuggled past Islamist checkpoints, and hidden in safe houses in the Malian capital of Bamako, 900 kilometers to the south. When French forces retook Timbuktu in January 2013, Ansar Dine fighters did burn the Ahmed Baba Institute on their way out. Approximately 4,200 manuscripts were destroyed in the fire. The fact that the figure was not several 100,000 higher is attributed to Haidara's operation. The manuscripts, as of 2026, remain mostly in Bamako. The conditions for their return to Timbuktu are not in place. Northern Mali, in 2026, remains under partial control of armed groups. The French military mission, Operation Barkhane, ended in 2022. The UN peacekeeping mission, MINUSMA, ended in 2023. The Russian Wagner Group, succeeded by the Africa Corps, operates in the region. So do affiliates of Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and the Islamic State Sahel province. Timbuktu, in 2026, is reachable only with armed escort. Foreign visitors are non-existent. The city's population is approximately 30,000. The desert advances steadily on its northern edge. Dunes encroach on the Mosque of Jinguereber, built in 1327. The Niger River, 2 kilometers from the city in the dry season, recedes annually. This is one city. The story repeats across the Sahel. To the east lies Lake Chad. In 1963, Lake Chad covered approximately 25,000 square kilometers, a freshwater inland sea straddling the borders of Chad, Niger, Nigeria, and Cameroon. It was the 6th largest lake in Africa. It supported a population of around 30 million people in its basin: fishermen, farmers, herders. The Kanem-Bornu Empire, founded around 700 CE, governed the region surrounding it for over 1,000 years, one of the longest-lived dynasties in African history. By 2018, Lake Chad had shrunk to approximately 2,500 square kilometers. The cause was a combination of climate change, reduced rainfall over its drainage basin, and unsustainable irrigation withdrawals from the rivers feeding it, principally the Chari and the Logone. The lake did not disappear at a steady rate. It collapsed in pulses. It lost approximately 60% of its volume in the single decade between 1973 and 1983. The displaced were not counted at first. By 2015, an estimated 2.4 million people had been displaced from the immediate Lake Chad basin. The local economy, fishing, collapsed. Herders, deprived of grazing land, moved south into farming territory. The conflict that followed has multiple names. In Nigerian usage, the militant group that emerged from these conditions, Boko Haram, was founded in 2002 and turned to armed insurgency in 2009. Since then, the conflict around Lake Chad has killed an estimated 350,000 people directly and through famine, and displaced over 3 million across the four-country basin. A lake that fed a millennium-old civilization disappeared in 50 years. The civilization that depended on it did not last another decade. The pattern is consistent across the Sahel. In Mauritania, the capital Nouakchott, founded in 1958 on a coastal plain that was largely empty desert, now holds a population of approximately 1.4 million, roughly a third of the country's total. The migration into Nouakchott began with the Great Drought of 1968 to 1974, which killed an estimated 100,000 to 200,000 people across the Sahel, and reduced cattle herds in some areas by 80%. Pastoralist families abandoned the desert and walked to the coast. They never went back. The capital, which had no plan to house them, sprawled. Sandstorms now bury the city's outskirts every dry season. In northern Burkina Faso, more than 1.7 million people had been displaced by armed conflict by 2024. In Mali, a similar figure. In Niger, hundreds of thousands more. The pattern of displacement follows the climate pattern. Where rainfall has failed, ethnic competition over remaining arable land has hardened. Where the state has been unable to protect populations, jihadist insurgencies have filled the vacuum. The map of attacks across the Sahel in 2024, published by the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, overlaps almost precisely with the map of the 100 to 400 millimeter rainfall band, the climatological core of the Sahel. The number of UN-recognized refugees and internally displaced people in the Sahel exceeded 6 million by 2024. The figure does not include the larger category of climate migrants, people moving in response to environmental change but not formally displaced by violence. Estimates of total Sahelian climate migration since 2000 run into the tens of millions. The political response has, over the past 5 years, transformed the map. Between 2020 and 2023, the governments of Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Guinea, and Gabon were overthrown by military coups. The first 4 sit within or directly adjacent to the Sahel. In September 2023, the 3 Sahelian junta governments, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, formed the Alliance of Sahel States, the Alliance des États du Sahel. In January 2024, they jointly announced their departure from the Economic Community of West African States. In 2025, they introduced their own currency proposals, biometric passports, and joint military force. French diplomatic presence has been formally expelled from all 3 countries. Russian and Turkish presence has expanded. The Sahel in 2026 is not the same political space it was in 2019. It is, by the assessment of every major intelligence agency, the world's principal active jihadist theater. The 2024 Global Terrorism Index recorded that, for the 3rd year running, more deaths from terrorism occurred in the Sahel than in any other region on Earth, including the Middle East. Burkina Faso alone accounted for nearly a quarter of all global terrorism deaths in 2023. Against this, since 2007, has been arrayed a project of extraordinary ambition, the Great Green Wall. The Great Green Wall is, in its original design, a continuous belt of restored vegetation running 8,000 kilometers across the southern Sahara, from Senegal in the west to Djibouti in the east, 15 kilometers wide. It was conceived in 2007 by the African Union, championed by then-President Olusegun Obasanjo of Nigeria and President Abdoulaye Wade of Senegal, and formally launched in 2010 with the participation of 21 African nations and an initial commitment of around $8 billion in international funding. The goal was to plant 100 million hectares of vegetation by 2030, sequester 250 million tons of carbon, and create 10 million jobs. By the end of 2023, after 16 years of implementation, an external review estimated that approximately 4% of the original target had been achieved. Some segments have succeeded. Senegal has restored an estimated 27,000 hectares. Ethiopia, planting outside the formal wall structure but in alignment with its principles, claims to have planted over 350 million trees in a single day in 2019. Niger, through a community-led, farmer-managed natural regeneration program, has reportedly added 200 million trees to its agricultural landscapes since the 1980s, many of them existing trees nurtured back from stumps rather than planted from seedlings. Other segments have failed entirely. The original idea, a continuous monoculture wall, has been replaced, in current planning, by a mosaic of agroforestry, water management, and pastoral land use reforms. Whether the Sahel will see the wall completed in any recognizable form by 2030 is, by 2026, unlikely. The continent below the wall continues to do what it does. The Sahel, despite its losses, remains one of the most demographically vital regions on Earth. The fertility rate in Niger in 2024 was approximately 6.7 children per woman, the highest in the world. In Mali, around 5.7. In Chad, around 6.0. The population of the Sahel is projected by the United Nations to roughly double by 2050, from around 100 million to over 200 million. The desert moves south at tens of meters per year. The population grows at over 3% annually. They are on a collision course. In Nouakchott, sand drifts up to the second-story windows of buildings on the eastern edge of the city. In Niamey, the capital of Niger, the average annual temperature has risen by 1.5 degrees Celsius since 1960. In northern Burkina Faso, the surface area of Lake Bam, once the country's largest natural reservoir, has shrunk by more than 60% in 30 years. The mosques of Djenné in Mali, the largest mud brick building in the world, replastered every spring by the entire city's population in a centuries-old festival, sit in a town whose Niger River branch ran dry for parts of the year for the first time in living memory in 2021. The 700,000 or so manuscripts of Timbuktu are now in Bamako. The fishermen of Lake Chad have become refugees, or insurgents, or soldiers. The capitals of 3 Sahelian states are run by colonels who came to power, in part, by promising to stop a war that was, in part, caused by rain that did not fall. 5,400 kilometers of the African continent are, in 2026, defined by a single fact. The sky above the Sahel is producing less water than it did a century ago. The land beneath it is, in response, producing less food, less stability, less of the cities and the libraries and the empires it once held. And the desert, by the most recent satellite measurements, is still moving south. It moved past Timbuktu first. It is moving past Niamey now. The map of the world in 2026 is, in this one continental band, being redrawn not by treaty or war, but by the steady, soundless southward walk of sand. There are 100 million people in its path. They are, mostly, not moving. They are watching it come.